The previous episode of Rhinesburg saw the expansion of our downtown waterfront, and it looks really good in my opinion. But we've had a lingering issue of no transportation since this year's has been started, and today we're aiming to fix that. Really, for this episode, I just want to thank Apple for their suggestion on adding some Amtrak stations, and honestly, I agree. Before today, if you wanted to travel anywhere in the region, you would have had to driven a car, known someone who could drive you somewhere, or just walked. Not exactly a great way to get around an expanding region like Rhinesburg. So on the northeast end of town, we will be constructing a train station and making sure we have routes set up around this expanding area, as well as adding in a few bus routes and another tram route, just to make sure that the regional connections are there for people who want to travel city to city but don't have a car. First things first though, I'm going to redo the grid over here. I felt like it was just a little too narrow in this direction here. So I think by expanding it, we'll be able to fit a little bit more housing, more buildings along this side here. And once all this is done, I think it leaves us with a pretty interesting spot for the train station. For this expanded grid, I'm just going to use the standard streets and some of the suburban variants that I've made with no road markings. The tricky thing here is trying to connect it to some of these grids. I basically have two grids, the downtown grid and then the historic Bakersfield grid, which uses wider roads. So trying to line all that up is a little bit of a challenge. And then the angled arterial there. So I think the grid looks okay. The widths and lengths of the grids are enough for, I think, 4 deep units with maybe an alley in between 1 or 2 grid spots. But overall, I think it looks good. After the expanded grid, it's time to look at where we're going to put the train station. So over here is kind of where our depot is now, and I'm looking at kind of where the train tracks will run. I want them going in either of these directions just to get as many interesting connections for freight and passenger trains as possible. I think having a line going throughout the whole area in like a loop would make sense as well. But getting the line from across the river over here is a bit of a challenge, just with the complexity of, well, the river itself and then how kind of narrow this part is. I decided to use the modern architecture central station, as I think, sure, it is modern, but I also feel like the architecture of it could place it in, I don't know, the 70s, 80s maybe. It's got a little bit of a brutalist aspect to it. And what I want to do is make a loop road, kind of like what you would see at an airport, where we're going to go with all one ways just to help with the flow of traffic, because I'm planning on turning this into a little bit of a transportation hub as a whole. So we'll have connections for buses, tram connections here as well, with the train station. So in order for me to really make sure that traffic doesn't just lock up over here, I'm going to give it its own road access. Looking at the upgrades for this, I don't really picture it having too many platforms. In real life, there are not too many places that are taking Amtrak anymore. So it really kind of hard to figure out what I want, because I don't really want it to have like every single connection possible. I want it to be somewhat realistic. So I'm leaving all of the upgrades off. With that being said though, it's time to figure out where to even connect this up into our grid. I mean, you'll see here it is extremely high elevation compared to where the rest of our network is. So at first I'm thinking maybe we can use a bridge across this element, but by the time the bridge reaches the land across the river, it's just too tight of a turn. So what I'm doing now is I think I'm going to build the tracks wrapping up around the hillside here. And I think it turns out pretty interesting. I also want to give a little bit of a riverside access. I think it'd be a neat little neighborhood that we could build later on. But to get a bridge here, I have to kind of fight the networks. You see, I get a little frustrated, but in the end, it works out. But yeah, I'm thinking just a simple road here that connects down here. But the connection right here that hasn't really done anything is where I'm going to bring the track across the river. And again, I'll have to kind of figure out how to make this bridge, because that's already a low bridge. But I think the height of it is just tall enough for me to squeeze a rail through here. So I just make sure the land is flat. I even dig down just a little bit, and then I connect it here. Although something that might be an issue for the city is how close this rail is to the river. I feel like they might have some real issues with flooding when it receives a whole lot of rainfall. So I'm not really sure how the city would handle that. They might have to have alternative rails going around the back end on the higher ground. But anyways, here's me trying to make the connection. Once again, finding it pretty narrow, but I think this turn right here makes a little bit of sense. Although you could argue I'm kind of favoring the road there instead of the tracks, but I don't know. We'll leave it as is for now. But the end result is nice here. It kind of weaves its way through this existing island with the drawbridge right here that'll be able to open up for any passing river barges. And then I can make this connection here. And then boom, we have officially made some track connections from one side of the river to the other. Now the problem is, how do we connect this track from all the way down there up to here? Initially, I thought I could just slope the terrain up to this, but it's just too steep, and it also wouldn't really have enough room for connecting to the other parts of the track, so I scrapped that idea. This is how I end up with the idea of sloping it up around the hillside here. You can see I'm clearing out the trees to make way for any kind of grading I have to do. I'll even this out just a little bit up here before just getting a little bit of a, I don't know, I guess a guide track. Here's just an idea of a connection that way. It's a little messy, but we clean it up a little bit later. Using the slope tool, I just want to get as soft of a slope as possible, because this is going to be freight and passenger trains rolling up this hill, and it would not be good for them to start rolling back down, especially on a single track. Not a lot of room for error there. Now the single track does connect to the other side, but how do we get the trains to turn around? They could back up on that single track there, but I think that'd be a pain in the butt. So I turn it around this way, and then I try to make these connections here, but ultimately it's a little messy, and there's not a lot of room for the trains to turn around. Connecting these two sides just to ensure that trains can approach the station from any direction. Okay, now I work to add the connections to the other side of the station. With this one, I try my hardest to actually make sure that the tracks make sense. So I'll have single tracks merging into the double tracks, which will then both go down to single tracks, which then merge into another double track, before finally moving back onto the main line. This way I can keep any kind of traffic jams on the train tracks as low as possible. Yeah, you see here, I scrapped that original plan. It was just too narrow, so I really widened this approach here. and I apply the same kind of principle on this side. Here I'm lengthening these double tracks. I was just afraid that they weren't long enough for any passenger trains to queue to wait for other trains that are entering or leaving the station. But lengthening it, I think, helps a little bit. Here, these connections are actually okay, but I think a single track is just not going to cut it here. And I also want another connection across the river, but I really want it to be a drawbridge, honestly, just for aesthetics. So what I'm doing is I just use the ferry line there, so I can actually have the drawbridge look. I don't really think it's going to be used at all, but aesthetically, it tickles my brain. Now with the tracks in, I can actually expand our interstate system. I have these stubs for the longest time, and I would really like to see some traffic actually use these roads and these connections that I've made a while back. So here I'm going to basically create our kind of highway loop around the city. It's a little long, but I think it will make a lot more sense once the city's actually built out a little bit more. It'll be able to connect to any surrounding suburbs, and it can connect across the river, all that good stuff. Most importantly for right now, we'll be able to see some cars actually driving around on it. Now, once again, dealing with the tunnels in this game, just absolutely brutal. It sucks, it really does. But regardless of how the tunnels look, I feel like the tunnels are kind of necessary here. I couldn't really go above the tracks. It's just too big of an incline for cars even. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to have the tunnel going just under the tracks there, coming out the end of the hill onto this bridge that takes the highway over the river. Honestly, I think the tunnels, they look okay. So it's something I can live with right now until they kind of fix how the tunnels work in the game. Okay, so the back half of the highway looks a little bit rough. I'm not going to worry about that until it's time to actually build out in that area. But here we can actually see cars driving on the roads now. Look at that. Pretty fancy. Nothing on this side yet, but it works. Back to working on the train station. I'll actually start making our routes. So the first route's going to go across the river that way. Second one will follow along the river on the other side. The third route will go all the way past Riverin to the other side of the map. And then here I'll have connections. You guys gotta let me know. I think these cities make sense. I'm doing one line to Atlanta, one line to Cincinnati, and then one line to Nashville. I figured those probably made the most sense into direct lines that a train would go. Like, obviously, I feel like for Pittsburgh, the line would run through Cincinnati first before Pittsburgh, so that's why I just went with Cincinnati. But let me know if those lines make any sense. Back across the river, we're at the Turkey Hollow train depot, and I have a lot of this space right here, but we've had all of these awesome housing assets come out since I built this, so I'm just going to sprinkle them in here. I'm aware I've neglected parts of Turkey Hollow, and I need to finish it. in due time. Now, switching gears, I need to add another depot, and I think the place would make most sense is by the steel mill and junkyard. So I'm just going to put this smaller footprint one here, and it will get a very similar treatment to how the train station was, with single tracks going into double tracks, which will eventually make their way onto the main line. Just for a little extra pizzazz, I'll give this place a big parking lot, and I'll even put in a few industrial businesses here. I gotta say, I'm really happy with the amount of industrial buildings coming out on the asset workshop. They're looking good. Now, I need to give the passenger trains the signature Amtrak look. Now, from what I've seen, there are a few variants. Basically, the signature dark blue and red, but then it's either a white or a gray. So some lines will have the gray bodies and some lines will have the white bodies. Alright, now that we have the train station all set up with the routes and the proper Amtrak colors, it's time to visit the problem of no public transport around the rest of the cities. Riverine, Turkey Hollow, both these places do not have any sort of public transit. So, like I said, people have to drive or walk. And I think the best way to go about this is to kind of make a loop. I'm thinking an endpoint here at the train station with a bus stop here. I want to give it a dedicated little turn-in area here. And I'll just place some stops in downtown Turkey Hollow, as well as over into downtown Riverine. The bus stops here gave me a little bit more trouble than I thought they would because of the parking. I didn't want the shelter sitting in the median, but that doesn't really work with this type of building or road, so I just used the bus stop. Also, I haven't really revisited Riverine since all the texture painting came out. So I'm just going back here and just experimenting to see if I can recreate what I've done with the surfaces with the tools here. And I think it turns out pretty good. Also, the flood bank is doing its thing. Okay, but anyways, back to the loop. So what I'm going to do is just have a line going from the Riverine bus stop to Turkey Hollow all the way to the train station. As simple as that. Later on down the road, I think I'll maybe add some more bus lines throughout these smaller towns, but I don't know. I'm undecided on that. Maybe something that would be cool is to have, once we get school buses, then I would definitely like to add some dedicated school bus routes taking people to all the schools in the cities. I think that'd be really cool. Until then, I'm not going to mess with it. Okay, but what I'm doing now is I'm just ensuring that I have the train loop actually set up. Here it's giving me a little trouble, but I already have most of the lines set up. I just need to connect it from across the river here. I'll just keep it simple like that. Connect it on the other side with a little bit more of an interesting thing here going over the track before connecting on the other side in this pretty large sweeping curve. A little bit of train action here as it looks like this passenger train is waiting for that freight train to go down the single track there. It might take a while. Let's see. Okay, so that was at 4 times speed, and that was 11 seconds. So I might need to adjust how many tracks are going across the river. Same over here, you can see trains are queuing up. Might need to be addressed in the future. But here we can see our buses pulling out of the bus stop at the train station here. I'll be honest, I don't really like the route colors, how it just colors the buses, the color of the route. I mean, it makes sense, and it's really helpful from a gameplay point of view, but personally, I like to have all the vehicles have a cohesive look for the city. I haven't really looked at any bus models, which I might need to in the future, but for now, this is just going to stay white. One thing I do want to add for the train station is a little bit of overflow parking. It just helps to fill up some of the space here, and it also is just useful for the city, for people to actually park their cars here, because we have this one parking lot here, but it's not too big. But anyways, I'm going to do a little bit of detailing, and I'll be right back with y'all. Okay, in the middle of the detailing, I'm also going to make this tram route just to get an idea of where it's going to go and actually have that connection for the kind of the transportation hub we have going at the train station. So I'm just going to have it cut through this area here, and we can really start to see the distinct lines going through the city and kind of how they work with one another to really flesh out the transportation network we have here. So the plan is for the immediate real dense areas of the city, we'll have the tram connections, and as it starts getting further out, we'll switch it to bus networks, and then once it gets really rural, they're just gonna have a car. I don't really have a naming convention for our tram routes, but this will be the Mid-City line. This empty grid here is going to be Mid-City. I think it's a simple name, but I think it also works. Also, the tram will have the official color scheme, the red, white, and blue. But here we go. We now officially have public transportation networks connecting the entire region. Now, places like Turkey Hollow or River Inn, it's not exactly the greatest, but we do have buses connecting all of them to Rhinesburg, and then within Rhinesburg, we have the tram networks connecting the city, and we have the train station taking people to different cities. So the citizens of Rhinesburg need not walk or drive anymore. For the most part. Okay, but now with the networks all done, I'm going to get back to detailing up the train station and filling in the surrounding area just a little bit. Okay, so a little bit of the detailing done. It's nothing too crazy, but I think it makes the place look a little bit nicer. You can see I added the transit lines throughout the loop here. I'm also putting in a bike lane here, as I don't really have any bike lanes in the city, and I feel like I'd need at least a couple. So that should hopefully prioritize the public transit and the bicycles over just regular personal cars, even though I have the parking there for them. Here, I'm imagining these offices are probably connected to the station in some way, and then I'll also have, in my mind, these could be like little gift shops or cafes, just something, all under the umbrella of the station itself. Okay, and here is kind of an idea of what the area is going to look like. I still want it to be somewhat dense, kind of like the downtown, but here is kind of where it transitions down into the row homes, the starting to see more big box stores out here, really trying to transition it down into the smaller suburbs area. Once again, I'll be using Smiley's assets here. These things just look amazing. I freaking love them to death. I use them all the time now. Also, I had an idea for this little rundown gas station in this corner, having this sort of dried out, overgrown triangle. I think it turns out nice, and it also adds a little bit more vegetation to the city. Makes it a little bit more of a focal point. I also want to add in this Holiday Inn. The only problem is it's pretty big, so I kind of have to figure out where to put it, and I land right next to here. From a top-down view, it kind of looks weird, but I would imagine it would actually make a lot of sense, especially right next to our train station, some of these offices. A real good place for people just coming into town to stay for a night or two. Gonna use a few trees around this perimeter fence I put in for some privacy, and then behind it I'm gonna add some warehouses to help fill in the spaces here. And it would also make sense back in the day, this was more freight oriented, to have these stations right here, or these industrial warehouses I should say, right here next to the station. And then once again, the beauty of these Joe's industrial blocks is you can kind of mold them into whatever shape you want. I'll top it all off with a chain link fence around here. Get rid of some of these trees, and then add some employee parking specifically for these warehouses here. Nothing too crazy, but some parking here. And then I'll go into some surface decals and do the old dirty special. You know what I'm talking about. After detailing out the little industrial corner here, I'm going to place down some of these dirt road net lanes for the tracks. And I'm kind of experimenting with the different colors of the soil. I would imagine as it gets closer to the river, it's much more fertile soil as it would be in real life. Higher up, it's a little bit more dry and arid, especially near the industrial areas. And like this, the gravel here, well, it's basically gravel, not really any kind of soil. But I think the transition works out okay. I was worried that it would be too jarring of a transition between the different types of net lanes. Let me know what you guys think, but I think it turns out okay. Also, because I'm not really sure of how the connection is here, I think it would also be a good spot to add a cell tower. On the other side here, we have that radio tower up on the hill, across the way, but I feel like we need some more connection stuff here. This little corner here, I figured I'd put a little bit of a depot, probably for some trucks or vans that the train station itself would have for any kind of track repairs or train repairs, what have you. So I'll just do pretty bare minimum detailing here using the static ploppables and some dirt decals. Okay, but I think it's coming along. Sometimes I struggle, especially with somewhat unique shaped road layouts like the loop there. I just don't know how to seamlessly incorporate it into a city that's full of grids. But I think it looks pretty good. And look, the trains are able to, make it up around the hill there in the sort of loop we have going on. Yeah, look at that. Pretty nice. That's the white variant of the Amtrak trains. Here is where I was talking about that little neighborhood by the river. So I'm just gonna build this out. It has the tracks right across the street, but I would imagine the benefit of this would be very cheap housing, although you probably could not get any home insurance on these things nowadays. Mainly due to the frequency of flooding, it would just be too high risk for some of these insurance companies to consider insuring it. But cheap housing. Along the backside, it's not going to be any kind of like beach or anything like that. It's going to be overgrown bushes. I don't imagine these people would really want to swim in the river here. I mean, maybe they would, but it would probably have some pollution runoff. It'd be really noisy. Although, even with the trains, if they're not coming by, I would imagine it'd be pretty peaceful down here. At least by the waterfront, at least to hang out for the day or something like that. I don't know. Interesting though. Okay, so I added a little bit more trees along the way just to hide some of the ugliness of the interstate. So that neighborhood's looking kind of nice, kind of quiet for being so close to the city. But now the issue is, what do I do with all this other blank space? This is a bit of an awkward lot, but I think I know what to do here. First of all, flatten the ground a little bit. We need some kind of amenity. We don't have, first of all, I haven't built my park out yet. So we need something like that. And what I thought I would do is, with it being so hot and everything lately, everywhere, well, how nice would it be to have a public pool for the citizens of Rhinesburg to just come here on a hot day and just hang out. Remove that parking because I'm going to add in some of these El Gendo parking lots. They're just so nice. I like having the parking spots butt to butt, I guess you could say. But also, there's this new multicultural food truck lot. I think this would go great just across the way from the public pool. I would imagine it's all on the same property, and they probably struck up a deal with some local food vendors to have some food trucks here. You know, they probably pay them to stay there for the day, and then they also get to keep whatever proceeds they make on the sale of the foods. And then I'll just add in some vegetation here. Using the paintbrush here, I'll make it a little dirty around the loop there. Boom. It's kind of nice. Okay, I added a small neighborhood behind the pool. I didn't really show it just because it's more of the same thing. But anyways, here I'm going to map out the district here. I'm gonna take some of the Newtonia and then replace it with this district here. And then I'll add this district for the center block here. This is going to be mid-city like we were talking about earlier. And this came in as Highlandtown, which I kind of like, so keeping it. But that's it for today. We've got a lot done today. A lot of public transit is all mapped out and ready for the citizens to use. But I want to say thank you for watching today. I really appreciate it. If you like what you saw today, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. Again, thank you all, and I hope you all have a good one.